crore rupees is more than double that of the country as a whole. And that makes Indian Americans a powerful voting community in this election season. With Geeta Mohan and Rohit Singh, Bureau Report, India Today.
Have said, who is going to be better for India, right? I mean, is it Donald Trump? Is it Vice President Trump? Have said, who is going to be better for India, right? I mean, is it Donald Trump? Is it Vice President Kamala Harris? What would you like to tell them?
I'd say that if we elect Kamala Harris tomorrow, we will have the first president ever who visited India as a child, who has Indian relatives, who experience what it's like to really know India from that perspective, not just as a geopolitical ally, but really from the bottom up. I mean, I feel like I have a different kind of sense of India myself from having gone there every few years, talking to my relatives, seeing my WhatsApp with all my Indian relatives on it. You just experience things in a very different way. And I think her added understanding of India from that perspective is an unfathomable asset in the bilateral relationship between the United States and India. And I think India will be very proud to have a daughter of India as president of the United States.
One last question. I know everybody is going to Pennsylvania. What are you doing between now and results come out? Where will you be? What are you doing to make sure you guys do everything you can to elect her?
Well, I'm heading out to York, Pennsylvania this afternoon to get out the vote, to canvass. I really think this election is crucial. It's every vote counts, and really it's up to all of us. So I've been out. I was in Georgia, and I've been north to North Carolina a couple of times, and now I'm heading out to Pennsylvania, and I'll be in Pennsylvania tomorrow as well to get out the vote and to really, there are people who have some last-minute questions, answering every question. We are earning every vote in this election. Kamala Harris is earning every vote, and so we're all out hitting the pavement for her to, really grasp this moment. And I think, again, I would just say, I think the election really does boil down to, for the Indian American community and for all communities, whether all of our voices will be part of this or whether just some of our voices will be heard. And, we've all lived through periods where there's more bias and anger, and then there's periods where we feel more welcome. And I just think, we stand at a moment where Indian American voices will not just be heard, but will roar in this election.
I did say one last question. I do have one more now.
Sure.
How's President Biden looking at this, election cycle? I know, he made the move. He stepped out of the race. What are his thoughts? Because you are an advisor to the president.
I am.
So tell us, what is he thinking? What's going on in the White House? Give us some details.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. The president is really proud of the vice president. As he said, he was a vice president. He knows every vice president, every vice president runs is their own person. She will have her own policies, but I think he's incredibly proud of her, and he wants nothing more than her to succeed. I think he thinks it was a great decision to select her as vice president, and I think he really does. He's first in line as her fan, but also recognizes she will have a different presidency. She has additional advisors. She's running her own race. And I think that's really the position of respect that he has for her.
Now, the U.S. election is a very complex and complicated process. Let's just explain it to you in a brief report by Ishita Mitra. It is a combination of direct and indirect elections wherein voters first vote in their candidates, and then on the basis of the votes, electors are decided. It's then the Electoral College that really decides and picks the winner. Take a look at this report.
As the clock ticks down to the election day in the US, millions of Americans are gearing up to cast their ballots to choose their next president. But while over 150 million voters may take to the polls, it's 538 electors at the end of the day who will decide who steps into the White House. So how does this intricate dance of democracy unfold? Let's understand. So in America, when you head to the polls, you're not just choosing a candidate, you're also selecting a group of people pledged to that candidate. In this case, it would be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Now this group is comprised of people called as electors. Now each state in America, there are 50 states, has its own set of electors tied to the popular vote within its borders. And the process of choosing electors is what converts individual choices into a collective decision. So how do states allocate their electors and what is the magic number needed here? Now this simple formula which is tied to the size of their congressional delegation. So under the Electoral College, all 50 states and the District of Columbia get electoral votes which is equal to their 2 senators and their number of representatives. For example, Georgia as a state has 2 senators and 14 representatives. So this means the state will have 16 electors. And since representatives are based on the size of the population, the smaller states like Alaska and Wyoming get about 3 each, while giants like California has 54 and Texas has 40 electoral votes. Now these numbers are dynamic. They keep shifting every 10 years with the census that realigns congressional seats based on the population changes. And the most recent census was conducted in the year 2020, which altered the electoral map, affecting how much power is distributed among the states. Meanwhile, Washington District, despite its lack of congressional representation, secures about 3 electoral votes thanks to the 23rd Amendment. So now each of the electoral represents about 1 electoral vote, and these electors vote according to who wins the popular vote in the state. For example, almost all US states follow winner-takes-all system, and where the candidate who gets the most votes from the public wins the support of the electors of the state. For example, if a state decides to vote red, then all the votes of the electors would go to Donald Trump. And in total, there are about 538 electoral votes in play, and the magic number is 270 here. This means candidates need a majority of 270 to become the 47th president of the United States. Now, if no candidate receives a majority of the votes, then the House of Representatives elects the president. And this process culminates in Electoral College meeting, which is to be held on December 17th. So after 5th November, the other important date is December 17th. Now, during this meeting, the electors gather in their state capitals to cast their votes for president along with vice president. And this meeting, which is enshrined in the US Constitution, finally sets the stage for the official count on January 6, 2025 in the House of Representatives. Another important date for you, January 6th. And with the new Congress looking on, these votes will solidify the outcome of this election. And just like that, the next president will be inaugurated on January 28, 2025. So this is the timeline of this election from November 5th to January 28th, which is when the election will conclude. Now, for presidential hopefuls, of course, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, the race is not just about winning hearts and minds. It's also about mapping out a path through the states. Candidates must strategically combine states so they can count on with battlegrounds that hold the key to their electoral success this time. Now, with this race becoming such a neck-to-neck battle, it is only the swing states that will decide who becomes the next president. So the journey to the White House, of course, is a complex puzzle where every vote counts and stakes could not be higher this time.
Now, like Ishita mentioned, if neither of the candidates is able to secure the 270 magic figure, then what really happens? It is a neck-and-neck fight. It is going to be a historical situation if such a case arises. Rohit Sharma will explain to you what happens in such a scenario.
The American election is so close that we do not know what will happen, who's going to win this election. But what is absolutely known is the fact that one of the candidates will be taking oath right here on the Capitol Hill, which is behind me. And as you can see, it's all lit up in all its glory. But there is also a chance, a very outside chance, that this election could be tied. And when I say it could be tied, it could mean that both candidates don't get to 270 electoral college votes. Both can end up getting 269 and 269, which would mean that there has to be a tiebreaker vote. And who's going to cast this tiebreaker vote? Well, the American Constitution has an amendment in place for scenarios like this, for an outlier election like this, where
If both candidates end up with 269 electoral college votes, it's the House of Representatives and the Senate that decide who becomes its next president. And in the amendment, it is clearly written that the House of Representatives, which is the lower house, they will elect or select the next president of the United States, while the Senate will have say over who becomes its next vice president. Now, this is why the down ballot rates in America are also very important in this election cycle. From the polling, it seems like Democrats have an advantage in the House of Representative races, so they might be able to come and win majority in the House of Representatives, meaning they could very well end up electing a Democrat as the next president of the United States. However, in the Senate, it looks like the Republicans will have a majority. And obviously, for obvious reasons, they will choose a Republican as the next vice president of the United States. And it's never happened in the history of America where there has been a tie and then it had to be broken. But if there was a possibility in modern politics of that happening, that could very well happen in this very election.
That's all in this edition of Elections Unlocked US Special. But before I go, I'll leave you with this story of a social media sensation that has captured America's attention. Peanut, the squirrel, was rescued by New Yorker Mark Longo, was later euthanized by the New York authorities after having tested positive for rabies. He has created a sensation and outrage in the city and has become a talking point this election. Take a look at this report.
A social media sensation, Peanut the squirrel, has shaken up American politics days before crucial elections. Peanut was rescued by New Yorker Mark Longo and lived with him for 7 years. On Saturday, Longo was raided and Peanut taken away by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the Health Department. Peanut was later euthanized to test for rabies.
It not only tears my family apart, but Peanut was the cornerstone of our nonprofit animal rescue. And 10 to 12 DEC officers raided my house as if I was a drug dealer. I was sat outside my house for 5 hours. I had to get a police escort to my bathroom. I wasn't even allowed to feed my rescue horses breakfast or lunch. I was sat there like a criminal.
A raccoon, also in Longo's care, was also taken away and euthanized to test for rabies. The viral squirrel's euthanasia triggered massive outrage online. With number of Trump supporters criticizing the Democrat government, the controversy was amplified by Donald Trump's top backer, Tesla CEO Elon Musk. American state law requires people to get a license if they wish to own a wild animal. Longo says he was working to get Peanut the required certification. Peanut amassed hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and TikTok. But at the peak of American elections, its death would be its most viral moment. Bureau Report, India Today.
At this moment, attention squarely focused on who's likely to win the presidential elections in the United States. If you think Maharashtra and Jharkhand are tight elections, don't know, can't say, too close to call, well, the United States is a whole different ballgame. And to talk about this, we're joined on this broadcast by Ishan Tharoor. He's a well-known columnist at the Washington Post. I have Pramit Pal Chowdhury, head of the India practice at Eurasia Group. And we have Arun Kumar Singh, who's been India's ambassador to the United States and is a non-resident senior fellow at Carnegie India. I want to go across to Ishan first. Ishan, very rarely have pollsters and pundits been quite as confused. Are they just hedging their bets and therefore not giving clear answers? All these battleground states actually likely to go down to the wire in the way that these polls are suggesting?
Look, the polls have been suggesting for a very, very long time that it's a dead heat, and it is a dead heat. So, I mean, there's, on a certain level, they're right. Of course, there are lots of different models, lots of different polls, and lots of different polls that say certain things point to different trends happening that could tilt one way or the other. We're talking about an election where the difference will be such a narrow margin of votes that it's, of course, quite difficult to really know come Tuesday night, and probably not just Tuesday night, come Wednesday morning, even perhaps even Thursday morning, what some of the results may be. And so we're in a situation now where, yes, because of the particular anachronism of the American system, it comes down to a handful of certain states that are really up in the air. And both campaigns think they're making a strong last push and hoping to consolidate some gains.
A lot of what you do, Pramit Pal, at the Eurasia Group is risk advisory. What is the Eurasia Group advising its clients in terms of who do you think is more likely to win at this moment? 46, 48, 49, 50. It's looking really, really tight. Is that how tight it's going to be? Or do you think everyone's just hedging because they can't be quite sure?
Well, I think that they can't be quite sure. I think the comeback companies, from what I remember of our American team, continues to believe Trump has an edge. But it's really down to, I think, one of the calculations, as little as 80,000 voters will make the decision. That's not a surprise. Biden defeated Trump with only about, I think, 45,000 votes made the decision for him, gave him the Electoral College. This time it'll go down to almost the same number. Once you're down to such tiny numbers, the polling is almost incapable of actually predicting anything. And on top of that, polling in America now is as bad as polling in India. It has repeatedly gotten elections, got the last two presidential elections wrong. It's been incredibly poor in measuring, should we say, the degree of, in the last two elections, of Trump support. It grossly underestimated it. And then in the midterms, it swung in the other direction and overestimated Republican support. So if you look at a graph, there's a recent graph that came out by a group of pollsters who looked at it and said the degree of error now in U.S. polling is at a record high. America just can't work out what its own voters want to do.
It's not just America. Haryana shows us that that's the case in India as well, but that's a whole different conversation for another day. Ambassador Singh, you've seen American politics at close quarters during your time there. Looked at from the outside, this Trump campaign looks more organized than the 2016 campaign for sure, arguably more organized than 2020 as well. Your sense of who carries the momentum in the final stages?
So I had watched closely the elections in 2008, 12, 16, 20, and of course now the current one. And you're right that this time perhaps the Trump campaign is more organized, although Trump continues to be unpredictable, unpredictable in many ways. But I still think it's difficult to say who carries the momentum. Now, if you recall 2016, it was only after midnight that the Clinton campaign finally conceded that she might be losing and then came back to concede only the next day. And in the 2020 campaign, Biden came on stage late at night and said, although the trends seem to be against us, we are likely to win. So just hang on there. So I think, as you said, there was a sense that immediately after Kamala Harris' nomination came through, she had the edge. After a while, Trump was catching on. But of late, she's again got the momentum. So I think on balance, one should just say it's difficult to predict. And I think from India's point of view, it doesn't matter who wins.
Ishan, let's build on that. Does it matter to India who wins? To some extent, in some ways, it does, because Trump comes in. If he increases tariffs, that impacts India. He's also more mercurial and transactional. On the other hand, Kamala Harris as president could potentially want to create more troubles for Prime Minister Modi and the Indian government in a lot of things that someone like Donald Trump won't care very much about.
I think the ambassador is right. There's been all signs from the Biden administration that India is a priority for the United States. They see India as a strategic partner in the future, and they wouldn't want to rock the boat. The wild card, as you said, is Trump's economic plans, his vision for really disrupting global trade and slapping tariffs on virtually everything. And then, of course, Trump's approach to foreign policy in general is so based on his kind of sense of bilateral deal making, his transactionalism, that there could be moments where India could be surprised by certain deals that Trump makes, Trump wants to make with India or wants to make with other countries as well. So I think in terms of continuity and reliability, there's a safer bet with the Harris administration. I think, before we even talk about the foreign policy implications, the other thing to really know about and recognize is that if Trump loses, he is not going to accept it. He has made it very abundantly clear that defeat is not something he's going to accept. He doesn't still accept his defeat in 2020, and the entire ecosystem around him has already started to lay the ground with conspiracy theories about the scams and steal happening right now. So we're heading for a pretty volatile moment in the event that Kamala Harris does win.
Pramit Pal, does it matter from India's perspective who wins? I get the sense by talking to many in government that they believe that Donald Trump might be easier to deal with. They also have a good rapport, the Prime Minister and Donald Trump. Will that make a difference, or do you think that Kamala Harris too is just likely to carry on in the same spirit as Joe Biden?
Well, I think the core relationship will remain exactly the same. The core of China technology, though the Indo-Pacific, all of that will remain, has been constant with both the Biden administration and with the Trump administration in the past. If you look at the foreign policy teams on either side, we saw our foreign minister met Philip Gordon, who's likely to be the national security advisor of Kamala Harris recently, and didn't seem to have any problems at that meeting, or was reassured that there would be continuity. And I gather some members of the Biden team, including, let's say, CIA Director Bill Burns, would probably continue in a Harris administration. So the continuity is strong. But there will be, yes, areas on the margins in which they will differ. Kamala Harris is a legal person. She tends to be much more focused she seems to be more legalistic, if you wish, in her thinking. So issues like civil rights, the Panun case that's there between India and US will probably become a bit more difficult under her. On the other hand, with Trump, one area which Prime Minister Modi takes very seriously, finance, green finance and climate generally, would almost disappear off the government-to-government agenda because his administration, or he doesn't take that seriously. But those are fringe issues. The broad strategic relationship will remain, I think, completely solid, and I don't think that will change at all.
Ambassador Arun Singh, is it correct that the MEA would find it easier to work with a Trump administration? Does Kamala Harris, as president, and her administration pose a greater headache for India on issues like Khalistani terrorists being supported by countries like the US and Canada? Is there likely to be more prickliness with Kamala Harris than with Donald Trump?
So I can't speak for the MEA or the government. I've been away from the government for more than 8 years. But based on my understanding of the situation and my understanding of how both Republican and Democratic administrations have handled India over the last couple of decades, including the Obama-Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, and the Trump administration, I think we should be broadly okay. There is, in some quarters, sometimes a perception that Trump is easier to handle. But if you go back and recall the Trump presidency, he was very, very unpredictable. He criticized India several times for what he said were high tariffs in India. He ridiculed the Indian leaders. He imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from India, ostensibly on national security grounds, which you can't explain if India is a strategic partner. He removed generalized scheme of preferences, under which many Indian products had duty-free access in the US market. And then you recall that in 2019, he invited Imran Khan to the White House when he wanted Pakistan to pressurize Taliban into getting into an agreement with the US. And in that White House meeting, he said that he was ready to mediate on Kashmir, and that the Indian Prime Minister had asked him to mediate on Kashmir, which was simply not true. And the Indian Foreign Minister had to, a couple of days later, say in Parliament that there's no truth to what the President had said. And also in the Trump administration, both governments had tried to do a limited trade agreement And they discussed that for 2 years, and they couldn't even succeed in getting that. So, the Trump administration will have broadly a positive approach, as we saw with the Indo-Pacific strategy, the starting of the Quad meetings. Similarly, in the Biden-Harris administration, we saw the Quad being elevated to summit-level meetings, and this whole new initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which has really deepened the technology partnership between India and the US. The authorization for General Electric to transfer 80% of technology for the F414 engines, or the authorization for the armed drones to be supplied to India. So these are the things that happened during the Biden-Harris presidency. So I think in the broad strategic convergence that is there, we should be okay with either winning the election. There will be different sets of challenges with the two, and we have to find a way to handle and manage those differences.
Ishan, how is Trump of circa 2024 looking different from what we saw between 2016 and 2020?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that he's older, exhibiting more signs of that age, and there are mounting concerns about his actual acuity and fitness in certain moments. He's had some quite worrying public displays. He is an angrier Trump. He's operating on a lot of grievance. Much of it is personal because of the mounting legal cases that he's faced and that he will be able to evade if he wins the presidency. But then there's also, he is channeling a right-wing nationalist movement that operates on grievance and anger, that is inflamed about various issues, most especially immigration, which may also have interesting wrinkles for the Indian-US relationship. And he's somebody who has really, his pitch to his base has been, this is going to be an all gloves off presidency. I'm not going to take any prisoners here. I will be your vengeance. And he's promised all sorts of astonishing executive acts. Some of them he may not be able to actually accomplish. But he's really going to take the US into an interesting chapter of its democracy if he wins.
Why has the Kamala Harris campaign, Ishan, according to you, failed to take off? When she came in soon after President Biden announced that he was stepping aside, the gap in the polls was much more. From there on, her campaign seems to have faltered to some extent and not really taken off, leading to someone like a Barack Obama having to tell Black American men not to vote for Donald Trump and instead stick with Team Harris.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's failed to take off. I think, yes, she came in quite late. The circumstances in which she entered were quite extraordinary, but we're seeing a campaign that is trying to build this sort of supposed big tent coalition. She's trying to appeal to centrists, appeal to moderate Republicans who can't really stomach Trump, as opposed to really turning the way Trump does towards the Democratic base, which in many cases are people of color, young people, poorer people perhaps in the cities. She's not making that pitch. She's making the pitch of the centrist establishment, which was the exact same pitch that Hillary Clinton made in 2016. But I think the Kamala campaign is also very mindful of what went wrong in 2016, and they believe that they've cobbled together the kind of votes and the kind of message that will make the difference in these pivotal swing states. And they're doing quite well, perhaps even better than Biden did in 2020 with white college-educated voters. And this is the curious thing. And you're seeing, of course, the Democrats will always win a majority of women, a majority of people of color. But yes, you are seeing on the margins, men especially, and men of color especially, indicating that they are more likely now than before to consider Trump and the Republicans.
Well, before we get to Maharashtra and Jharkhand, there is the results in the United States to deal with. We keep going back to Ishan Tharoor, Pramit Pal and Arun Kumar Singh. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights on the build-up to the final climax in the US presidential elections. Thank you.
Thank you.
While most opinion polls in the United States show a dead heat between Trump and Harris, the state of Iowa, a deeply red state, has sprung a last-minute surprise. Kamala Harris has taken a surprising lead in a voter survey over Trump in the state that last voted for a Democrat candidate in 2012.
Chest thumping, beating trumpets. Both candidates for the US presidential election tried to ensure that their voters remain confident before the 5th November vote.
But all I can say is on Tuesday, just go out and vote, and we're going to close this thing out, and it's going to be party time. It's going to be party time. And this is really all you need to know. Kamala broke it, and I'll fix it, and we'll do it very quickly.
So, Michigan, 2 days to go. You ready? In one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, and we have momentum. It is on our side. Can you feel it? And we have the momentum because our campaign is tapping into the ambitions, the aspirations, and the dreams of the American people. Because we are optimistic and excited about what we